Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here, and indeed it's wonderful to see maintenance taking off as a theme for discussion here in the United Kingdom, as it has under the leadership of Andy Russell and Lee Binsell in the United States in recent years. It's very promising in all sorts of different ways. Now, this summer I was on holiday in Liguria. And drove over a bridge in Genoa that was to collapse with the loss of many lives. And that was one of those few moments, of course, where the issue of maintenance comes to the fore in public discourse. But once one looks for maintenance as an issue, it's, of course, everywhere. Now, for example, why do our new long-range aeroplanes have two engines, when 4 used to be the norm, and indeed 4 is much safer than 2? And the answer is straightforward. It costs nearly twice as much to maintain 4 engines as to maintain 2 engines. And in the economics of aviation, maintenance is a really important factor. Indeed, air forces and airlines are maintenance organisations. The maintenance of aeroplanes is almost as big a business as the making of aeroplanes. And aero engines is a central part of maintenance of the whole aeroplane. So maintaining is there, though invisible. And it's got some very interesting features, both today and historically, which is really what I want to talk about. Maintenance is often associated with kind of routine work, let's say cleaning. But I think that's misleading. Maintenance is highly skilled work. And indeed, maintaining things is often more difficult than making them, curiously enough. There's a wonderful book called Shop Class as Soulcraft by Matthew Crawford, where he makes the point that repairing a motorcycle is he found more challenging, more intellectually interesting than doing a PhD in philosophy. Why? Because you had to learn how to maintain. You had to take lots of decisions, potentially costly decisions on the basis of inadequate information. We all know that maintenance is a cause of great anxiety, precisely because of this lack of information. We have to rely on an expert maintainer to tell us that this piston ring really does need changing, or this house does need to be pulled apart so the asbestos can be taken out, or whatever it might be. We are not in control in questions of maintenance. So what happens if we take maintenance seriously as a phenomenon? I think we find it's a very useful way to say some very interesting things about history. Some things which are not so pleasant, as well as some things which are about revalidating the work of non-innovative people. For example, maintenance is about keeping things much the same. And society's rulers in particular are prone to devote lots of resources to that effort. And one of the kinds of resources that are used are engineering resources. If we think historically about engineers, we need, and it becomes very obvious very quickly, that engineers are some of the key people in the maintenance of society. I mean, it's in our weird present that engineers want to present themselves as creative, as disruptors, and all the rest of it, which I'll come back to in a minute. But historically, they're about repairing roads and bridges and ensuring mines are safe. All these very routine, authoritarian, sometimes works. The disciplining of the machine, the disciplining of the structure goes along with a disciplining of people. And one of the great classic instances of that in the historical literature is Karl Wittvogel's Oriental Despotism. And he asks himself, why is it that the great hydraulic societies of the past, Egypt and Mesopotamia and China, were so despotic? And the answer he came up with was because these societies depended on the regulation of dangerous water flows. And that required a strong state which imposed on people the obligation to maintain the water system. So the nature of the system was such that maintenance was absolutely critical, and the criticality of maintenance led to despotism. Quite a strong argument. We've had actually similar arguments in the not-so-distant past around nuclear power. The problem with nuclear power is precisely that it's so dangerous that it has to be regulated, maintained with an extraordinary ferocity. And that ferocity implies a diminution of civil liberties. It's what has been called authoritarian techniques rather than our democratic techniques. Yeah, so maintenance is not all good. And maintenance has been a focus for a certain kind of reflection on a certain kind of dark side of not just modernity but of the past. So it's not necessarily a good thing, is what I'm saying. In a world where aeroplanes can fall out of the air or cities can be flooded, rigid order might be called for. And I think it's not accidental that many of our dystopian novels are set in futures without technical change, but a profound necessity to maintain the system, to maintain the status quo. And Terry Gilliam's Brazil seems to me to be the ultimate film about maintenance in many, many different dimensions. But there's a wonderful irony at the heart of maintenance. It is there to retain order, to recreate order, and yet it depends on tacit knowledge. It depends on understanding of uncertainty. It depends on flexible reactions to changes which are unpredictable. Maintaining an aero engine is something that people learn to do not from a manual, but from their experience of maintaining engines. So the same engine at the beginning of its life will need to be maintained every, 1,000 cycles, but at the end of its life it maintained much, much less, at least in terms of overall time, because people learn how to do it. So it has this kind of very human, very intuitive side of maintenance, and also this very bureaucratic side as well. Now, why don't we see maintenance as an absolutely routine, interesting, challenging feature of our modern societies? Well, it's partly, I think, because we increasingly have a very poor sense of the material constitution of our world. When we think of stuff, we think in a deluded, futuristic way about it. We think of our present and future as being weightless, as machinery being essentially tech. We live in a kind of new ether of digital innovation. Indeed, we are encouraged to pride ourselves on all being innovators and entrepreneurs. Everyone's CV makes a claim to be innovative in one aspect or another. It is expected in professional development. Creative destruction is what masters of the universe do best. Maintenance, conservation is definitely for losers. However, there is nothing innovative about most so-called innovators. There is little that is entrepreneurial about most so-called entrepreneurs. What we have in the modern world is a quite extraordinary amount of imitation rather than innovation. And one of the key instances of that seems to me the way we imitate the idea that we are all innovators. There is no more tediously overused word in the globe today than innovation. And what do I mean by we live in an unprecedentedly imitative world? Well, for example, there are something like 200 iPhones made every year. We all have to use iPhones in exactly the same way. We might want to compare that with a Model T Ford, which you think of as being the ultimate kind of mass-produced, routinized product. Well, there were never more than just over 15 million Model Ts ever created. The iPhone is built some of the iPhones are built in a factory far bigger than Henry Ford ever dreamt of running. Ours is the age of mass production of imitation. Never in human history have so many done exactly the same thing over such a stretch of time and space. But, of course, there is the real world, a real material world, where the old is actually hugely important. There are bits of that material world where people are designing machines that are supposed to run for many decades. For example, the F-35 aeroplane that was designed many years ago is not yet in service with the British forces, and once it is, if it is, it will be in service for decades. This would have been unthinkable in the 19th century. You've got to go back to the 18th century to see people planning to operate machinery for quite that length of time. But there is another way in which this material world, the world of maintenance, is coming back into our everyday understanding, and that is through Brexit. Suddenly, all that talk of living in a dematerialized world with electrons whizzing about becomes irrelevant as we start talking about supply chains in food, in energy markets across the island of Ireland, supply chains in motor cars. I mean, this is so retro, so last century. And note also that the conflation of making and maintaining is now at the very centre of British politics. Because what the British government wants to do with the so-called Chequers plan, it's actually a proposal, better a dream, a fantasy, is to separate out the question of the regulation of goods and the regulation of services. But people who know about this stuff immediately turn around and say there is no such separation possible. Maintenance and making go together in the modern world. Your plan is simply not going to fly. So we live in a world of bullshit, not least in the realm of Brexit, but there are really hard realities that against which the bullshit eventually has to come up against. And maintenance is one of those. And we've heard already very eloquently what happens if we don't attend to the centrality of maintenance in our real world. Thank you very much.